Churches need to call it what it is. It's not an affair. It's sexual misconduct. Just because someone may be in need of support and guidance, it doesn't give the pastor a green light to use their power and influence to entice that person to have sexual relations with them. But unfortunately, pastors all around the world continue to use their power, their influence, and their prestige to manipulate others to satisfy their own selfish sexual pleasures. And enough is enough. This reckless behavior by pastors and clergy has to stop.
Don't nobody go in the bathroom for about 45 minutes.
You done fucked up, you know that, don't you?
You got knocked the fuck out! What's happening?
Young Crystal Woolston was simply a college student dealing with mental health issues, just simply trying to cope with the stressors of life. And finally, Crystal's prayers were finally answered, or so she thought. Crystal met a pastor who seemed to have her best interest at heart, or so she thought. Not a pastor seemed caring, considerate to Crystal's needs, and appeared to be an angel sent from heaven. That is, until his true colors began to show, and then Crystal immediately realized that he wasn't an angel sent from heaven. He was a devil sent from hell. Now, the pastor allegedly told Crystal that, hold up, I know I'm married. I get it. I am married. But God told me, yes, use God. God told me that in order for you to heal, you need to have sexual relations with me. What in the what? What you talking about, Willis? This is how pastors all around the world are manipulating and enticing people of their own church to defile themselves and compromise themselves into sexual relationships. Unfortunately, Crystal bought what the pastor was selling. She believed the pastor, which led to an unfortunate sexual relationship with the pastor for years. She just was on this unstoppable roller coaster going full speed. According to Crystal, this inappropriate sexual relationship with the pastor lasted for several years until she finally gained the power and the confidence to reclaim her life. After 6 years of abuse by this pastor, Crystal finally reclaimed her life and began to fight back. After finally making the decision to be intentional about taking full control of her life, Crystal started the battle against that pastor with the church. It took 4 more years before the church finally decided to remove the pastor from the leader of the youth field trips. Although a small victory, this was a major milestone in Crystal's pursuit to proclaim justice, not just for herself, but for all victims who have been victimized by pastors using their power and authority to force them into inappropriate sexual situations. This led Crystal to join forces with advocates and a group of survivors to ensure that this heinous situation, this heinous behavior from pastors stops here, that this stuff doesn't continue to permeate throughout all the churches around the world. Now, their goal is to make sex between pastors and anybody that they're leading or overseeing in the church to be an illegal act, and they will be penalized for it illegally as that they committed a crime. This was the goal of her and the advocates and all the other potential victims of these heinous crimes by the pastors. Now, this is nothing new. This law has already been honored in 13 states, but you get only 13 out of all 50 states, and this is not enough. The goal is for it to be honored in all 50 states. How the pastors have been dodging accountability for these heinous sexual acts for decades is because they label them affairs. Right. They're almost saying that the victim was complicit. It was an affair, but that's not the case. It's not an affair. It's sexual manipulation and abuse at the hands of someone of a dominant demeanor, someone of a bigger than life demeanor, someone that holds the office that represents God. How heinous of a crime can it get? Kate Roberts, she spoke out. Now, Kate Roberts is an adult clergy abuse survivor and co-founder of Restored Voices Collective. She spoke out and said, the more it is legitimized as abuse in many ways, the better it is for prevention and for survivors getting the help that they need. According to advocate attorney Baz Tavijian, if a victim of clergy sexual abuse comes forward, they are most likely vilified as if they did something wrong. They're often accused of trying to ruin the pastor's career. They are also convinced that it was simply a mutual affair. This is absurd. So you mean to tell me that the pastor's career is more important than the lives of the people that he's serving? This is unheard of. Baz poses a great question. If a pastor or a faith leader uses their spiritual position to identify, groom, and sexualize a relationship with someone under their care or supervision, is that really a consensual relationship? Absolutely not. It's not consensual if you have to manipulate. Consensual is both 100% agreeable, meaning that I'm using all that I have to come to the agreement under my own capacity and everything else, no manipulation, no influence from the other side, and I'm totally agreeing that this is in my best interest. That's not how this is happening. They're being manipulated, groomed, and influences, and to some degree saying that this is what God is telling them to do from the pastor, from the man of God. So what do you expect that the people are going to do when they're following, been raised in this church, look at this person as a bigger than life figure? What do you think that they're going to do? And the pastors, they know this. Shame on you, pastors. This is why the churches need to be reformed, because all of the sin is not outside of the church. The church is looking more sinful than the world. The pastors are taking all of the criminals' jobs. Baz also reveals that most of the calls she receives from these clergy sex abuse victims, they're uncertain of whether or not they were victims of abuse or not, because it's confusing. The very person that you trusted and followed is now abusing you and telling you that this is what God wants. So it's definitely conflicting to the victim of the abuse. What's worse, according to Baz, is they're always overwhelmed with guilt and shame, as if it's their fault. And this is a problem, because this is what the churches want them to believe. They want to make them believe that they agreed and were consensual in this relationship, but they were groomed and manipulated by and power tripped by the heinous pastor. And this is so unfortunate. We need church reform in the worst possible way. Lucy Hunt, a researcher for Baylor University, says, victims of clergy abuse often consider all they have to lose: their reputations, their relationships, their marriages, their faith communities, and even their own faith, leading most to remain silent and internalize the trauma. This is so unfortunate. So on one end, they have to endure this abuse, this defilement by someone that they loved, admired, and trusted. They have to endure that first off. And then they have to internalize it and suppress it and try to deal with them all on their own, because anyone they try to tell or try to get justice through, they're going to vilify them as if it's their fault. Oh my goodness. This is a shame, and this is not of God. Hunt goes on to make her argument, saying this behavior is quite different from what happens to people who have affairs. Consensual relationships don't result in trauma and in lifelong suffering, and that's the issue. But this is what the churches have been pushing to the victims for decades, and it's so unfortunate. Where's the empathy? Where's the love? Where's God? Some startling results shown by researchers at Baylor University says that survivors of adult clergy sexual abuse suffer rates of traumatization bigger and higher than the rates of war veterans. Are you serious? So you telling me that the trauma of the victims from these clergy sexual assaults is more traumatic than those of war veterans? This is how serious this issue is. The pastors are not helping people and bringing them to God to elevate their lives. They are ruining people, using them and abusing them for their own selfish desires and sending the people to the gates of hell. Our churches desperately need to be reformed. According to one survivor, she said that she didn't initially know how to describe the assault that she endured. Right. The best she could do is say the pastor convinced her to have an affair with him. It wasn't until her husband, yes, she was married, yes, and his pastors are also married. It was her husband that said, this is a misuse of the pastor's spiritual authority and not a consensual affair, but manipulation and abuse. And her husband was dead on. According to the survivor, it was very much emotional, mental, psychological, physical abuse, but the spiritual component was the worst part of it. Check this out. She said it felt like the pastor had raped her soul.
Oh,
this
my
is disheartening.
God.
This is unfortunate, and this has to stop. Now, another victim of these heinous clergy sexual assaults came forward, but she was too afraid to come forward for years until she became suicidal and said this was the only recourse she had, and she finally came forward. And thank God that she didn't end her life, and she's coming forward to now end these heinous clergy sexual misconducts in all the churches. And it's so unfortunate, and the churches need reform. And in the words of the survivor, originally I was just trying to live, just trying to take another breath. When you've depended on the institution your entire life to guide the way you live, the decisions you make, how you raise your family, and then suddenly the church just kicks you out and says you're helping Satan. Essentially, it destroys your soul. This is what happened to this survivor. Not only did she have to deal with the act of getting abused and manipulated by this pastor, then she had to get ostracized by the church and blamed, saying it was her fault and that she's working for the devil. This is crazy. But the research also shows that only 10% of victims that come forward saying that they were victims of these clergy sexual assaults actually get support. So only 1 out of 10 people that come forward actually get help and support. So what is happening to all these other 9 people? But not to mention this one person that they saying is getting help and support. What kind of help and support? But are they still getting vilified? This is an epidemic, and it's happening to more and more people because they're too afraid to come out. So this makes it easier. This plays into the hands of the pastors because out of sight, out of mind. So if they're afraid to talk, then they can have their way with them and continuously have their way with them. And now if they're thinking that if they do talk, they're going to be vilified, then the pastor can turn up the heat and do more and more manipulation and heinous things to these people. And they're going to continue to listen and be complicit with it out of afraid of being ridiculed and kicked out of the foundation that's trained them and learned and taught them for their entire life. This is a major worldwide problem. Some politicians chimed in as well. According to State Senator Dave Henn, consent is not a defense. If the person who commits the sexual battery is a member of the clergy who, in such capacity, is in a position of trust or authority over the victim and uses their position of trust or authority to exploit the victim's emotional dependency, he says it's so hard for survivors to be heard, much less to obtain justice. So again, in these churches, we're hearing these, not just sexual assault, all kind of misuse of power and abuse that's going on in our churches. That's why they strongly and urgently need to be reformed. But here's the thing. Just start. These things have been perpetuated for decades and decades and decades, passed on from generation to generation to generation within our churches. And the buck needs to stop here because it's ruining lives, ruining the very lives of the people who they're supposed to be supporting and helping and enriching their lives. So our churches are indeed failing us, and every system is a reflection of his head. So the churches are failing us because the pastors are failing the churches. God is not in the pastors and God is not in the churches. Therefore, the pew, the congregation, is being led straight to hell. And this is so unfortunate. Listen, to all you out there, especially the people that go to church, that's entrusted into these pastors, let me tell you something. The first thing you need to know is that the church is within you. Never allow a pastor to dictate your relationship with God. The pastor is just there to convey a message that they're supposed to be getting from the Spirit of God, but you have to ensure that you know God for yourself. Yes, God for yourself, the God that's in you, the God of Abraham. You got to know God for yourself, so that way, if a pastor is trying to lead you astray or trying to manipulate or groom you into something that's ungodly, you can recognize it, and more importantly, you can have the power to end it before it starts. So the church is in you. We only go to church to fellowship with like-minded saints. So always keep the main thing the main thing. No pastor, no clergy, no minister, none of them is bigger than you. Not at all. They just hold the office. Never let them force you to defile yourself or your integrity or your principles ever, regardless of what they say or how they try to manipulate you. Listen, you are important, you are necessary, and you are sufficient. You deserve the very best of everything, and never settle for less, and 0% compromise. I appreciate you so much for watching from the depths of my heart. So please keep watching, because I'm going to keep bringing it. You be great. And more importantly, be blessed.